June the 9th, 2026. Guys, I want to go into this video. So when I talked about last night, we need to look at some of the deeper, older connections to the biblical narrative and why we're here and other things. But what I'm finding out is the scribes were so desperate, and many of you may know this or parts of it. We've talked about the layers of some of this, but the scribes, what they did, we knew they changed words and books and took them out. But they also turned, kind of like modern day politics, they turned good to bad and they turned bad to good. And the entire world fell for that lie. It's amazing, but that's what's happened. And so we got to look past what we've seen written by the scribes and what's been changed. And it really goes back to, let's say, the flood, Noah's flood. But that's just a story from the ancient Sumerian text. In other words, it was passed down, names were changed, things like that. But it was an old flood legend, the tale of Noah and the flood. And again, it happened in Samaria. So what we're finding out is the Sumerians basically had the world's oldest text. And when you go back that far and you start seeing the stories layered in the future sections of, say, the King James or whatever, then you realize that they are retelling some stories and renaming the characters in those stories. And not only did they do that, but they, again, turned good to bad and bad to good in some of the most important aspects of what we call religion. And start off, we talk about the different versions of the Bible. Most of them all come from the Masoretic text, right? And what they talk about, and this is just an example, and I've told you before, that Elyon is the supreme God. Yahweh was one of the sons, and Yahweh was appointed Israel for his portion. But Elyon was the supreme God of all the territory, let's put it that way. Now, what happened in the Masoretic text, it says that they divided the land between the sons of Israel. And the scribes did that to make it focus on Israel instead of any of the other nations or any of the other demigods. Anyway, they had to control power. That's why Rome eventually took it over, because they saw what was going on there. And Rome played a big part in the hands of the lying scribes and what they did. But if you go to the Masoretic text, using Deuteronomy 32:8-9, the same one where they said the sons of Israel, right? That the nations were divided according to the sons of Israel. Deuteronomy 32:8-9. Oh, go back further than that to the Dead Sea Scroll fragments of the called 4Q Deuteronomy. They found the unredacted original Hebrew text. It didn't say Israel at all. The scroll reads Ben-El. Ben is just like Ben-Hur, son of Hur. Ben-El, sons of El, sons of God. The land and the nations were divided according to the sons of God, of El, not Yahweh. This is just a little piece of the onion we've got to peel back to get into the really deep subjects. But if you don't understand this, think about it and try to realize what we're saying. Again, you go back to the oldest information you can find, and you usually find the closest to the truth you're going to get, because it's been changed. And guys, the amazing story again about all of this is the good was turned to bad and the bad was turned to good. But again, the sons of El in the Dead Sea Scrolls, not the sons of Israel. And what we were seeing by the hands of the lying scribes was a rush to point all fingers towards Israel, and as a fact, in the sense, guys, let me say it like that this is the most important place and Yahweh is the most important God. And they wanted to push that around the world for their narrative. Again, it was hijacked by rhinos from Rome and then Constantine and people like that. But the way this went down, they wanted it to go completely monotheistic instead of polytheistic. In other words, their God was supreme. We have to do away with anything even talking about the sons of God. It has to be the sons of Israel, hiding the polytheistic blueprint of the ancient Near East. And so that's what they were doing. They had to point all fingers to them. And guys, that is still going on today. And when they do it, especially in today's modern churches and preachers that you see doing it, you may see one talking about, well, we've got to support Israel. And then I saw one get really angry, start slamming his hands down, face turning red. And if you don't support Israel, you're anti-Semitic. Guys, that's not teaching religion. That's a sign of panic, a sign of being afraid of losing control. You control the narrative if you have the supreme God. Is their basically blueprint, and it continues to this day. But when you see that, guys, you realize that that is a sign of panic, not of love, not of anything to do with God. But when they control that narrative, it also has a lot to do with financial control. Your money, donate, do this, and then they turn around and tell you to buy gold. Anyway, the problem that we got is how they manipulated it and turned it 180. And everything we think we knew is 180. Now, this goes, again, a little deeper. We're going to stay in the Old Testament for a little while because really you need to start at the beginning. And guys, if you go into Genesis, it talks about the garden. Now, that is also a repeat of Sumerian culture. In other words, things that happened a long time ago have been repeated. And in the Sumerians, it was Edin, Eden, okay? And there was two brothers. One was Enlil, one was Enki. Now, Enki, the way you remember E-N-K-I, because of the K-I, you can think of king, because he was the one that tried to protect mankind. He's the one that warned of the upcoming flood in the Sumerian text. He's the one that changed the genetics, and which really got Enlil mad. He changed the genetics to open the eyes of the slaves that Enlil had created. That really made Enlil mad. He was a god of anger, in a sense, or demigod of anger. But they were half-brothers. Remember that? They were not full brothers. Now, if you move that forward into the Garden of Eden, there were two other half-brothers called Cain and Abel. And if you don't understand that Cain was not a son of Adam, then, again, it's hard to get much deeper than that, because it tells you that. Eve said, when she was asked by Enlil, it wasn't God, it was their God. When Enlil walked in and said, "What have you done?" She said, "The serpent has seduced me." She got pregnant. She had twins. One of them was the serpent's child. They called him Cain in the Bible, but in the Sumerian text, he was Enki. What was he accused of? Why was Enlil so mad at Enki? Because Enki told them, "Eat of this and your eyes will be open." He was trying to move them out of the DNA dominant strain of a blind working slave. He had a heart for them. And so they turned good to bad. In other words, they had to make it appear that Enki was an evil serpent because he had went against Enlil. Enlil wanted to keep his dumbed-down slave, DNA-manipulated group just like it was. But when Enki told him, "Eat of this tree of the knowledge, and you will be as the gods," he was reawakening their DNA. And because of what happened with Cain, think about it, that DNA was changed. And so what did Enlil do? He kicked Cain out. Now, there was a lie also brought in there to further demonize Cain. Now, we've all been guilty of this mistake, of believing this mistake, but Cain did not kill Abel in the old Sumerian text. There was a disagreement between the shepherd and the plow, and in other words, the harvester and the shepherd, the people that grew the vegetables, and the people that tended the animals. That was the problem there. But they came to an agreement in the Sumerian text about it and went their way. Now, in the Genesis version, Enlil was extremely mad. He kicked Cain out because he knew that now man would be free. Enlil had told them, eat of the tree of knowledge. And they did. And what happened was the genetic DNA was changed by Enki. Enlil was very mad. You've opened up the eyes of the slaves, fool. That's what he was saying. I don't like these people. They're just slaves. They're noisy. I don't like them. And look at what you've done. But they made it to where Enki was the evil one, and his children were the evil ones, because they were the makers of cities and metallurgists and music. Those are the things that people that are suddenly awake do. They're no longer just slaves. They start thinking. And they made that sound evil. All to keep us in a state of confusion, just like the book of Revelation, guys, moving from Genesis to the end of that. Revelation pretty much is a history. It's not a prophecy, and it's a history of the Roman invasion and the things that happened there. And the reason it was, again, taken by the scribes, what did they do? They made it mysterious. They made it a little bit confusing. They made it somewhat fearful to some people. Why? To keep you in that state of confusion and wondering and no solid base, when it's so simple. Beyond all the religions, beyond all the Bibles, beyond all the texts, our Father said, treat others as you want to be treated. And guys, you know that's the golden key. You can throw the rest of it away. Once you've turned that key, you are in the right place. You've just peeled back all the nonsense, all the noise, all the lies into the very basic essence of you. And that is your ability to turn within. Christ said it. The kingdom is within you. It's not in a church. And so once you can peel back once you realize all of this was a lie, and again, changing it from good to bad, and see what they did, but you can always go back to the most ancient sayings of all. Christ said it, treat others as you want to be treated. That goes back into ancient Sumerian too. And back into the Old Testament too. You reap what you sow. But when you finally turn the key and to what our Father, our Creator, wants you to be, is the fact that you are aware that you treat everybody and every animal and every creature as the way you want to be treated. That is the universal language. But what did they do? They added so much garbage on top of everything that it, again, Revelation can be, we've talked about it endlessly. But it goes back to, guys, even the four winds, when it talks about them holding back the four winds, and when you see Jerusalem surrounded, escape to the mountains, all of that happened 4 armies, 4 garrisons of troops had surrounded Jerusalem, about to take it out. And they paused for over a year on all 4 corners. And during that time, just as they were told, when you see this happen, you escape into the mountains. And there's mountains north of there where they did escape to. And then after about that year, and what had happened was there was a big political conflict in Rome. One of the emperors committed suicide, so there was kind of a vacuum there, and they just paused the war. And people escaped. And you know why? Because they had the knowledge. They were not destroyed by lack of knowledge. They were told to get out. When you see these things happen, flee. And they did. And if you study it hard enough, they even talk about the mountains where they went. And so what they did was take a story of the Roman conquest and all of that, put it into a futuristic fable to keep you in control, to not let you fully understand, to make you keep wondering, and how is this going to happen? How is that going to happen? When it doesn't matter. Our Father's in control. And what his simple message is, do unto others, just like we're talking about, as you want to be done. And so you break through all of the mirrors and all of the garbage again and go right to it. That's the key. Let me go back just a moment. Let's read this. The real identities in the garden. It says, when you peel back the Genesis narrative, it is original Mesopotamian bedrock. The characters in the Eden, the plane of the gods, locked into place perfectly. The serpent, Enki/Ea, his literal title was Lord of the earth and the waters. His sacred symbol was the intertwined snake, representing wisdom, fertility, genetic lineage. We see it with the doctors and chiropractors and everything else. In the Sumerian text, Enki is the master geneticist who loves humanity. He wanted humans to have higher consciousness, self-awareness, and free will so they could grow out of being blind slaves. And Enlil hated that. The god who was angry was Enlil. His title was Lord of the Wind, Storm, and Command. He's the one that ordered the slaughter of cattle. Things like that. The sacrifice of animals for human so-called sins. I've never understood that. I never will and never want to. Anyway, Enlil was the strict legalist administrative commander of the Earth Station. His agenda was the exact opposite of his brother's. He wanted humans to remain ignorant, blind, and perfectly compliant workers created solely to mine resources and grow food for the gods. In Genesis 3, the text makes it look like God is angry because a moral boundary was broken. But in the original cuneiform files, Enlil is furious because his brother Enki ran an unauthorized genetic operation behind his back. This was an advanced civilization, if you don't realize that, guys, and you know it was. Look at what has happened in history. Enlil had placed the human workers in his private garden enclave and strictly forbade them from accessing advanced knowledge or higher consciousness, called the tree of knowledge. He wanted them to stay down-sampled. The intervention, Enki the serpent, bypassed his brother's rules. He approached the human matrix, Eve, and initiated a spiritual and genetic awakening. As Eve said, he seduced me. Sometimes it's simple. And Enlil said it, and it stated it even in Genesis 3:22. When he discovered that the humans now have independent consciousness like you and I do now, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And he flies into a rage. And what was the result? The two brothers, the two half-brothers, guys, and that was the DNA change. They held the DNA change for the awakening of man. Enlil hated it. Enki had destroyed his complete control of mankind. Later on, of course, he won't try to drown everybody. And for you guys that haven't seen any of this before, I hope you realize where we're going, because we have been told, again, good is bad and bad is good. It's called the scribal inversion, rewriting the curses. When the latter Jerusalem scribes edited these accounts during the Babylonian exile, they had to hide the sibling war. They took Enlil's legalistic fury and made it the voice of God. And they took Enki's act of liberation and made it in a demonic curse. It says when you read the specific judgments delivered in Genesis 3:14 through 15, you're reading Enlil passing a formal administrative sentence unto his brother Enki and his lineage. It said, on your belly you shall go. Enlil demotes Enki's status, stripping him of the high legal standing in the council and branding his snake symbol as a token of absolute shame and lowliness. He already had that snake symbol, guys, but it wasn't what you think. And so, again, Enki broke the chain. He freed the prisoners. And that's what this is about, freeing and breaking the chains. Forget all the nonsense. Find your Father within. Talk to him. Treat your people fairly. Everybody, take care of everything you can. Help everyone that allows it. And do your best. Stop worrying about tribulation. Stop worrying about the book of Revelation, because it seems it was all manipulated just to keep us in control, doubting, wondering. And, you know, it actually goes back to this in a sense. And I realize that there were a couple of letters involved in this, but go back to Albert Pike for a minute. And it was supposedly 3 World War scenarios, World War I, II, and III. Now, come to find out that when the first letter came out, it was just World War I and II. And then later came in how World War III comes about. And what it talks about there is the fact that when all of this starts to come down, man will lose his compass. People will. They will be left without a compass and just it become a nihilistic situation. In other words, when the truth hits and you say, well, I thought that I thought the serpent was the evil ones, but no, it's just the opposite thanks to the inversion of the scribes. Then things start to change. Then you start to realize there's only one way through this mess, and that is the kingdom is inside you. You don't need the preachers. Why do you think they raise Cain and do all this? Because they want to control you, and they want to control the narrative. When Christ told you it's within you, we know that. Because when he says enmity between your seed and her seed, this is Enlil. This is the literal declaration of the genetic and narrative war we have been tracking. Enlil decrees that Enki's awakened independent bloodline, Cain / the serpent's seed, again, good to bad, will be locked in a permanent, brutal struggle against the managed, compliant human collective running on Enlil's matrix. And guys, it has been a war ever since then among those groups. And more, guys, you see the takeover politically, religiously, educationally, to not think for yourself, for people to tell you everything's wrong, or you see certain political parties scream and yell at everything. Nothing is right. You see that panic, and you see the confusion being propagated even to this day. And you just have to step away from it. But it says, under a strict historical critical cross-examination, the angry God in the garden is Enlil. He is the original archetype of the jealous territorial sky god who throws a tantrum when his labor force begins to wake up. By collapsing Enlil and Enki into a single deity, the scribes successfully created a narrative loop that forces the average believer to worship the very authority that tried to keep them ignorant, while fearing the architect that originally tried to set them free. Are you listening? Guys, and we've always been led to believe just the opposite of what the truth is. We were told that the serpent in the garden was to destroy the bloodline. The bloodline of our father. But Enki loved humanity. He bypassed his brother's Enlil authoritarian restrictions and initiated a genetic and spiritual awakening in the human matrix, or Eve. He didn't trick humanity to destroy them, like we've been told. He brought them the fruit of the independent consciousness so they could break free from being blind slaves. This is where the hands of the scribes executed their genius-level deception. If the text left this truth naked, humanity would instantly recognize that the kings, the tax collectors, and temple priests ruling over them were running Enlil's ancient compliance matrix. That's where we're at. Don't comply. Forget this group of people. Forget the preachers that scream about being anti-Semitic. Why do you need a church to talk with our Father when you barely get any teaching or preaching at all in those places? Why do you need another man or woman who possibly has less intelligence than you do and less knowledge, and you're trying to follow them? It's a natural thing to do, but we've been led to be controlled by other people, not to think for ourselves and to be one-on-one with our Father. As long as they can keep you looking, well, I got to go do that. This man says this or that man or whatever, even me. But what I'm trying to say is you don't need any of that. That is the fake mask that they put on, guys, that they put on us. And how would you ever figure out anything when you believe exactly the opposite of the truth? And we've been told that. You will one day believe everything that's a lie. Well, it's time to break that. It's time to forget about the worries of a book that was called Revelation, that was written about the Roman conquest of the tribes of Israel, that of Jerusalem. It's much more than just holding back the four winds, and that's when the army stopped on the four corners, and the seal, the knowledge of God, was put in the people to flee. There's more than that. They took Enki's act of compassion and turned it into the ultimate sin. That sounds so democratic, man. Maybe that's where they got that name. They took Enlil's legalistic fury and turned it into righteousness. They invented the concept of original sin to make the average believer feel perpetual guilt, broken and dirty for just being alive. All of that is useless garbage and nonsense. You are a living, breathing child of our Father. You need none of this noise. You talk with Him. And again, what's the key? You walk in consciousness. You're conscious of people around you, of course, but you treat everybody really good. You know why? Because our Father sees that. He realizes at that point the key has been turned. You're no longer in a frantic, searching mess. You're no longer stressed like you were. You're starting to see who's in control. All of this noise was just fake movies and fake books thrown at us to keep us from getting to the truth. By making good look bad and bad look good, the scribes successfully programmed humanity to worship the very authority that shortened the telomeres. Guys, you know what they're talking about there? That's part of your DNA, your telomeres, the end of it. When those go, you start aging pretty quick. But that happened, guys, after Noah. How did that happen? See, Noah and them lived a long time. They were awake. But in order to shorten that, Enlil had to try to rebreed some of that out of them. Remember the strange wives that went aboard the ark? And that's just a story in itself. But it happened back in the Sumerian text. In other words, You had the breed of the Inky tribe. They could live 900 years. Enlil couldn't have that. He wanted short-lived. People didn't have long enough to do much, just be slaves. And so they intermingled after the flood. And again, the sons of Noah had a lot of trouble. Shem was recognized, one of his sons, guys, as being in the DNA of Enlil, not of that tribe. And when that happened, they started crossbreeding out the long lives of our people. They shortened the DNA telomeres. That's how it happened, just the way that Enki introduced the awakening in the garden by seducing Eve. The same thing happened with Noah's group. Enlil had his spies, and they bred, and they started each year after that, lifetimes became shorter. Again, by making good look bad and bad look good, the scribes successfully programmed humanity to worship the very authority that shortened their telomeres. Enlil limited their lifespan to 120 years in Genesis 6:3 and trapped them in a matrix of survival. They forced the average believer to fear the archetype of wisdom. You don't need that tree. And cling desperately to the prison warden for salvation. A code that Rome would later perfect and that modern screaming preachers still use to run their multi-billion-dollar empires of panic today. You are an anti-Semitic if you don't worship Enlil. And that's what Rome has become, and that's what Israel has become. And it always has been. That's why the Israelis hate Christians. We're different DNA. Same reason they hated Abel, and Cain, because he represented a DNA change to enlighten people. And so after the flood, Enlil started back in. He never could quit. He didn't destroy them with a flood. He couldn't get quite all of them. But so he had a backup plan. Let's strip them of the telomeres, their long lives. That is evil. And let's just look at this a moment. It's called the sacrifice dynamic. Just like in Genesis, both brothers present the fruits of their labor as a tribute to the divine matrix, they call it. In this case, in the Sumerian, it was the goddess Inanna. She initially prefers Enkidu, the farmer, Enki, Enkidu. But Dumazi, the shepherd, argues aggressively that his livestock fat and milk are far superior to the farmer's grains. In the confrontation, Dumazu approaches Enki, Mudu, aggressively in the field and prepared to fight over who is preferred. But it was a peaceful resolution. In the original unredacted cuneiform record, no one dies. In Enkidu, the farmer peacefully de-escalates the tension, Enki. He bows to the shepherd, grants him access to his pastures, and the two share a fraternal pact. The foundation of early civilization was built upon a peaceful contract between the herder and the tiller. But no, Enlil couldn't let that happen. He had to turn Enki's side into the seeds of the serpent, the demons, the city builders, the musicians, the metallurgists, the ones that could think, are evil. And we all fell for it. But you know what? That's what these end times are all about. This last generation is blowing past that. And the only way to do it, like I said several times already, focus on your Father. And by doing that, if you want a Father to be happy with you, what do? You make sure you take care of all of his other children, right? That's exactly right. And then that key is turned, you are free. And why did the lying hand of the scribes transform this peaceful agricultural treaty into history's first brutal fratricide? They did it to execute three highly strategic institutional objectives. They wanted to protect this Enlil sacrifice rules. As we uncovered, Enlil wanted a down-sampled, obedient slave force. In ancient Near Eastern religions, Enlil's system required blood sacrifice, like Baal, and like you see when they kill innocent sheep and goats and heifers. How demonic is that crap? I mean, I never believed it. That's why I've always been anti-Semitic. Always will be. I sense the truth. I've said this at least 10 or 12 years ago in a video, that I don't read the parts about the blood sacrifice of the animals and all, because I know it is not the same God. I called hell back then too. Anyway, things are changing. But it says, by having God reject the farmer's bloodless offering of vegetation and accept only the shepherd's bloody offering of fat, the scribes legally locked in the requirements for the later Levitical temple sacrifice system. Evil upon evil. They framed the peaceful farmer's inherently wicked, lazy rebel simply because he refused to participate in the blood sacrifice. It's a shame. It's a human shame. It's a tragedy to the life on this planet that our Father gave us. That's why I've been a vegetarian, guys, for 50 years. And what they were doing was demonizing the lineage of Enki's line. They called the serpent. But the serpent was not evil at that point. That was a DNA symbol of a highly sophisticated doctor, basically. But Cain, pronounced just as it is in Genesis in the Hebrew, Q-A-Y-I-N, represents the literal serpent seed, the bearer of Enki's advanced genetic spark of craftsmanship, technology, and city building. Man, they couldn't have that. We couldn't have smart humans. And guys, what is a shame is we've all been fooled. By writing into the text that the father of the metalsmiths was a cold-blooded murderer, when Cain, it wasn't actually Cain, but when that murder didn't occur, by writing into the text that the father of the metalsmiths was a cold-blooded murderer, the scribes successfully branded Enki's lineage with a permanent psychological mark of shame called the mark of Cain. It allowed the institutional priesthood, just like we have around us today, to tell the public anyone who uses independent intellect, crafts, or technology carries the blood of a murderer. Again, why they do it, guys? They turn good into bad and bad into good to ensure that the average believer would reject their own native sovereign intellect and stay dependent on a bloody, legalistic system of fear and sacrifice. And I've felt it many times. Guys, I want to end with this. There's a lot to come, but we've been going on a while now. You got a lot to digest. I'm still doing it myself. But about the difference between El Elyon and Yahweh. Again, Yahweh was one of the sons. Baal was one of the sons of El Elyon. And, of course, Baal was, the same thing happened to him that happened to many others that happened to Cain. Good for bad, bad for good, all in the name of keeping control. But there was a couple things that happened in the Old Testament. God explicitly tells Moses that the ancient ancestors did not know him by his personal name, Yahweh, but by a completely different name. In other words, they were calling him Yahweh now, but that was never his name. It says, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, God Almighty. But my name, Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them by that name. It was not granted unto Moses and the mountain. And that was Yahweh on the mountain, the storm god. It was not El Elyon. Again, he was telling them, that is not, you don't call me that. I did not make myself known to them by that name. Where are they coming up with that? They were taking their God, to putting him in place to be the world God, so that Israel would stay in power with Rome. And what are we seeing today? Trump and Bibi fighting, Trump tells them to don't bomb somebody, they bomb them. There will be no peace like that. Again, that's part of the destructive noise that's coming from Enlil's clan. And when we're talking about the wars and people that do that, we're talking about the storm god, Enlil. We've all been told to lie. Guys, I'm watching it. I may put up a short update tonight. Looking at Lake Mead, they are still trying to keep that thing afloat. It's dropping. They're pumping in more water. Lake Powell's releasing a little more. But we're going to look at it this afternoon. Again, it'll just be one of the shorter ones, and we'll look at the details on it. But guys, don't kill the messenger. I want you to think about it. A lot of you were pretty much aware of where I was going to go with this. But now that we can go, we can go this deep, and you understand, or again, you may not. It may take a day or a few hours or whatever to realize everything was a lie. Everything. And so now we can go deeper. We'll get past that. Just understand what I'm talking about. And let me say this. Some of us have studied under some of the best teachers on the planet. And they were fooled also. And that's a shame. They didn't know it. They didn't know it. They didn't do it on purpose. But we have people now that do that. We have preachers that do it for money. They lie, cheat, and steal. Get you to turn in your life savings for a little change where you lose quite a bit of it in the transaction. And you trust those people. You've got to come out of Babylon. Cannot stay there and expect to get anywhere. As long as you're fooled by the wrong side, guys, how are you going to make it through it? Again, it goes back to this. In that letter of World War III, supposedly by Albert Pike, again, it was added, it said they will be so confused. When all of this comes down, they will have no moral compass. They will not know who to turn to. And in that confusion, they will turn to the ultimate worship of the Luciferian doctrine. All of it was going against the truth. So if by turning this thing back around, peeling some of the layers off, we prevent that loss of compass. If you're understanding the truth and you can separate it from all the lies and noise, then you're not going to be surprised and caught off guard when the truth is revealed, because you may be getting it right now. So that won't work for God's children, because they will not be destroyed for lack of knowledge. But Enlil, if it was up to him, you would never have the knowledge. And we've been lied to, guys. It kind of makes me angry, but in the same sense, we were put in this generation for this reason. And to stand tall, to tell the truth the best way we can, dig as deep as we can, but never forget, most of it's lies. The people that are telling you that and preaching this crap about certain things, they are simply trapping you into a matrix of fear and confusion. And that's how you're controlled. When you shed that off and break free, they lose their power. You win the game. We're watching it, guys. Our Father loves you. I love every one of you. It's a heads up. Be safe. See you soon.